Book discussion, The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Elif Batuman is a woman. She grew up in New Jersey. She is of Turkish descent. She is now a staff writer for The New Yorker. And this is a novel, but it is very autobiographical. Before I go into the book discussion, just for listeners that are new, why we're doing book discussions here at the Not Even Wrong podcast is for two reasons. One is the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And reading books is not just the pastime of hedge fund manager, is actually part of the business because it's conditioning of the mind. Literature, or generally reading, is conditioning of the mind. We have a series now where we're reading about computer architecture courses, quantum machine learning courses. So it's not just about novels, but novels are definitely part of it. And the way we see novels is kind of like conditioning of the mind. It's the equivalent of doing exercises in the gym versus, let's say, learning how to fight if you're a fighter, or learning how to actually play soccer if you're a soccer player. So that's why we're doing this. The other reason why we're doing is also keep a record. I mean, we'd like to know what we read and what we thought about this. So Elif Batuman, The Idiot book discussion. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's May 5th, 2022. This is Krim Delko. For the day, the fund is down 9%. For the year, the fund is down 27.7%. The market is down 4% for the day, and for the year, 13.7%. We're underperforming by 14%. Massive drawdown, one of the largest drawdowns we had in the history of the fund today, driven by the Fed, pure macro. There's a little bit of China news, but let's focus on the macro. We have a massive rise in interest rates, again, about 15 basis points on the 10-year just today. Basically, what's happening here, and this is just a prelude, again, for new listeners, we're giving a bit of a prelude into what's going on with the markets and why we are performing the way we're performing. And then we're going to have the main topic of the podcast today, which is the book discussion of Elif Batuman's The Idiot. So let's talk about the markets. The Fed FOMC meeting yesterday was the first meeting where they raised rates and signal a further rise in rates. What happened yesterday during the call, during the FOMC meeting and right after, and then what people took away from generally the meeting was that the Fed will be less inclined to raise rates more aggressively because of inflation. But the market today is basically forcing the Fed's hand, saying, no, we don't want to buy bonds at this levels. Inflation is too high. You need to keep raising rates. Why is inflation high? The Fed basically believes in supply chain induced inflation. So this is not monetary anymore. That's why the Fed thinks that increasing rates is not necessary. However, the market is saying, look, inflation is inflation. I don't care where it's coming from. And you, the Fed, you can have a damp impact on inflation by increasing rates, even if it's a supply chain induced inflation, because you can lower demand to the point where those prices readjust. So this is kind of what's going on. When we say forcing the Fed's hand, it means what it means. It means that, well, you're telling me you want to be soft on markets. Well, guess what? We, the market, decided that's not going to fly with us. We're down 27.7%, a massive drawdown, very, very difficult for us to deal with this. Like we said before many times, volatility is part of the business. And we have three options here. One is we stay put. We have to make sure we can survive with the leverage that we have. And of course, we have a massive laser-focused view on our businesses, which are fundamentally all doing fine. Of course, the valuation in some of our biotech stocks is questionable, but of course, that also now has improved a lot. And given the fundamental businesses are still intact, we believe that our portfolios are intact. So the one is stay put. The other is short the market. We believe that's not worth it because given what's happening, we believe that maybe there's not 20% downside max, and you're not going to short the market for 20% downside. And then we have, you could do that, but of course the probability of that happening is relatively low. And then also, how are you going to, pick the bottom and all this? And there's implications. Day trading, it's not our forte. For people who want to do it, maybe you can get a 20% out of the market in the worst case scenario if we have a bankruptcy of banks and hedge funds and all that stuff. The third is try to make money. Let's say one of the things that is happening on the macro side is the strengthening of the dollar. Hugh Henry says that one trade would be short the Chinese yuan. You can add to that short the euro, short pretty much any currency, because strengthening of the dollar usually stresses the system to the max, because there is a lot of carry trade going on, people borrowing dollars and buying local currencies, invest in local currencies. And when the dollar goes up, their liabilities go up disproportionately, and that can cause massive distress. So this would be one idea. We will talk about this in other episodes, about ideas of how to make money. Right now, we're still focused on basically our long-term vision of creating wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. In other words, we're looking for disruptive innovation, and we want to invest in companies and projects along those lines, and not take advantage of macro turbulences because we just are not investing enough resources and time to be really good at it. We are doing right now work on quantum machine learning. These are the things we want to do, and this is how we want to make money with Orange Capital Partners. So having said that, what is the risk in the market? I think the number one risk in the market right now is a nuclear implication for the Ukraine war. I think that could have massive repercussions, of course. It's terrible to even think about it, but it's possible. I think the second risk is less dramatic, but still tough for financial people, which would be major blow-ups in Europe, emerging markets, maybe even in the US, in terms of what I just said, the carry trade unbinding. So these are the two main risks. Otherwise, we believe this whole Fed interest rate type of situation is in check. We're not too concerned about that. Because fundamentally our companies are doing fine. So let's talk now about Elif Batuman's book. This is the main topic of this episode. It is about the book, The Idiot. Now to say, before I go there, I read about 2/3 of the book and I gave up. It became too boring, too repetitive. I just couldn't hang on to it anymore, but I still want to do a review because the book has inspired me in some ways. I think Elif is a writer that is worth looking at, and I think it's a question of taste sometimes. For me, it just became, again, too repetitive, there was nothing left. The juice was out of the book for me. I couldn't hang on, and it's sad. I hate to do that. It's almost like giving up a marriage or something, but it is what it is, and I still want to discuss it because there were some interesting ideas. The book is, Elif is a comparative linguist, so that's her training, and it's a lot about language and a lot about how we perceive the world from a language perspective, and I think that's a very important thing. This will be my first takeaway from the book is think about language. There's a lot of passages in the book where she plays with language, where she uses language to illustrate things. I mean, just in the beginning, she talks about email, so email with a pronunciation of male in terms of male and not male, the post male, but more the male, the human male. So things like that, just make you think, why do we call it this way and that way and all that? And I think what's really important here is that language is really just, if we talk about computer architecture, which is actually a course we're just taking right now. Computer architecture is the idea of how to translate a high-level problem into electrons, because we want the electrons to solve the problem for us. This is what computer architecture is, and tomorrow quantum computing architecture would be how we translate the high-level problem into photons or something else, some superconducting materials, which will be the physical substrate of a quantum computer. So again, the idea is, again, high level, low level, and then all the intermediate steps in the computer architecture space. We have a lot of abstractions, which means the abstraction layer, let's say, of how do we abstract from the problem to the algorithm? Well, the algorithm is an abstraction of the problem, and then the program is an abstraction of the algorithm, and then the instruction set architecture is an abstraction for the program, and so on and so forth. What it really means is that we use language as an abstraction layer to communicate between layers, let's say, between one place and another place. It could be between humans, it could be between abstraction layers on the computer stack. Language is abstraction. I think this is one of the big ideas, takeaways, or just inspirations that this book gives me. I don't have much more to say here, and I think this is part of the drawback of the book. It kind of opens doors, but it doesn't really go far. And then it all keeps opening these doors, but then you kind of get tired of opening doors, and you want to see a plot, you want to see something. The woman's in love with a guy, they're in Hungary, they're doing stuff there, and it just becomes too boring, like they're in a village in Hungary, and the villagers are this, and the villagers are that. And then sometimes she opens this door where she talks about Dostoevsky and the idiot, and that's interesting, but then it goes back and just becomes, the second takeaway from this book, it made me think, Elif is, I think, a self-proclaimed obsessionist about Russian literature. And of course, the name of the book is direct. Um, well, it relates to the idiot. It's a what's the word? It's a hint that she is inspired by Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Now, Dostoevsky's The Idiot has a couple of things that I find very charming. One is, of course, Prince Mishkin's sort of transcendence in a society of hierarchies, where he kind of transcends that. Now, of course, he has money, which makes it a lot easier to transcend hierarchies, but nevertheless, he has that ability, like Elon Musk, to transcend hierarchies, to transcend divided groups, to have this naive almost, and that's what children, they transcend hierarchies. Children, at least in the early stages, they don't necessarily have a lot of hierarchy because they just play, they just do things. They do things that we consider stupid or not stupid, whatever, but they don't have these hierarchies. And Mishkin is a little bit like that. And I think in this character, in the particular, in Elif's book, the person that, I don't know if she is the person, Celine, and then she uses a synonym in the book where she plays another character, Sonia. She has that, you know, and I find that's one of the interpretations of The Idiot and Dostoevsky that is very powerful, because I feel like Elon Musk is a bit like that. So this is definitely transcending throughout the centuries. And number three, I think one of the things that also this book made me think is that Russian literature has this quality of being something that everybody should care about and everybody should love it. But in fact, I don't like it. It's heavy, it's boring. I don't like Russia as a place. It's dark. I mean, not that I have something against Russian people or anything. It's just, as a place, it's dark, it's violent, wars, even now, again, they have people like Putin and Stalin. They come up with these people. It has, you could say the same thing about Germany, of course, but Germany somehow has much more optimistic tendencies than Russia. Russia is heavy, depressing, deep, and that's what the literature to me looks like. And well, that's fine. Maybe that's what people love in Russian literature, this heavy depression, because maybe they resonate with that. I don't resonate with that, and it makes me feel a bit like I'm supposed to like it, when in fact I don't like it. And this is how I felt about this book. But again, it opens doors, and this is the fourth thing I want to say about this. There's some positive stuff here. What's definitely positive is Elif continuously inspires. She is able to inspire. She is able to open these doors of thinking, of thinking about ideas, just being curious about what's coming next, which I think is a big part of any book. You got to be curious what's coming next. And again, I lost that curiosity sort of 2/3 into the book, but she has it before, so it's not completely. This is not a book that I put down after 10 pages. This is definitely a book that I was happy to read for a while, and then maybe just the juice went out. Maybe Elif had a situation while she was writing the book, or maybe it's part of a bigger plot and I'm missing out on something much bigger. I don't know what it is, and it's fine. Again, I took a lot out of this book, so I'm happy. Again, she made me think about Russian literature. She made me think about the abstraction layer of language. And I want to mention the first example here that really struck me, and that is math. There's this passage in the book where she talks about the fact that math is the language of the elite. It started as an abstraction layer, and then it became the language of the elite. And I think that's a very good example of how language has power. Language has power, particularly in the case of math. If you are a math person today, you have more power than people that don't speak math. And I think that to some extent that's justified, because math people can get stuff done, engineers and so on and so forth. But it's still worth thinking about. And I think that's what I mean with opening doors. She doesn't really go further than that. She doesn't elaborate. There's no particular plot that either tells you it's good or bad, or maybe as a reader, I'm looking for a little bit more. Like, what is it now? Is it good? Is it bad? Give me a little bit more meat around the bone. She's not doing that, but she's opening the question. And now let's get back to the example I already mentioned about the idiot. So there's interpretations of Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and there's a particular line that I really like a lot, and I'm not going to quote it, but it kind of talks about how the Prince Mishkin transcends hierarchies, how he opens up doors between divided hierarchies, between Also, he takes the seriousness out of the relationship. A seriousness, this is often also just a part of a power game of a hierarchy. So those are the kinds of things that I think come across also in Elif's novel here. Again, maybe Celine is part of that, but it just transcends through the book. There's a certain unwritten feeling maybe that comes through the book that I find very powerful. Another idea is in the early part of the book, Elif asks, why did Anna have to die? She alludes to Anna Karenina and Anna Karenina's suicide in the book. She says, I'd rather know why Anna has to die than talking about Russian landowners. And what she's alluding to here is sort of the abstraction within the university community, the academic community, how they get things to a level where it's not understandable anymore, where it's not interesting anymore. And she's, again, opening a door, opening up questions, but she's not offering a lot of answers. And I think that's partly also because she's a journalist. She's probably a journalist in true nature. That's what journalists do, which often frustrated me as a former journalist. You can't just open doors and ask questions. You gotta have answers too. Life can't just be about asking questions. So this is something that I noticed in this book, and maybe that's partly why I wasn't, again, I was inspired, but not enough. It's like reading a New Yorker article. And Elif is a staff writer to New Yorker, but she didn't do as good a job as William Finnegan with the Barbarian Days. I think she missed a little bit, but that's okay. Again, I can't recommend the book in terms of, because I didn't finish it, but it was worth an episode. So for anybody who's listening to this, make up your own mind, spend the money, read it. Maybe if you like Russian literature, if you click along those lines of thinking and the vibes and the feelings of those types of books, you might like it better. To summarize, Elif Batuman, The Idiot, a book that opens a lot of questions, interesting, inspiring, linguistic questions. What is language? What is an abstraction layer? It asks really interesting questions about Russian literature, about academia. It talks about the certainly love in there, and maybe more importantly, topics such as power between man and woman, power between intellectual and non-intellectual people, those kinds of things they come across. Elif talks about the academic world, which is very abstract, and uses that as a powerful tool. And I think finally it is the difference between journalism and doing something else. And I myself was a journalist, I'm now a hedge fund manager, so I went through this. I think journalists like to ask questions without offering answers. And hedge fund managers, they like to ask questions and they like to have answers for those questions. Thank you.